What if I told you that for over 300 years, Europeans crushed up human mummies and ate them not by accident? Not in a desperate famine. They did it on purpose to cure headaches, heal bruises, stop internal bleeding, and even boost their libido. Doctors recommended it. Apothecaries sold it. Royalty swore by it. From powdered skulls to liquefied flesh, dead bodies became medicine. This wasn't some underground cult. This was mainstream healthcare. And the worst part, the mummies were real. Let's go back to the 1500s. Europe during the Renaissance, a time of scientific discovery, art, and corpse consumption. The idea came from a huge misunderstanding. Ancient Arabic medical texts described a healing substance called mumia, a kind of tar or natural resin found near tombs or mountain caves. But European doctors confused that with the black, resin-coated flesh found on Egyptian mummies. So they thought, maybe that stuff is what made mummies last so long. Maybe it has healing powers. And just like that, a trend was born. Mummified human remains stolen from ancient Egyptian tombs were shipped to Europe, ground into powder, bottled, and sold. They called it mummy powder. You could buy it in pharmacies from Venice to London. Not hidden, not illegal, not rare. It was as normal as buying aspirin today. Let's pause. If you had a headache and your doctor handed you a bottle labeled ground human corpse, would you take it? Be honest. No judgment, just curiosity. Drop your answer in the comments. And if this is the weirdest thing you've learned all day, give the video a like or subscribe. Only if you want more of this kind of history, of course. Now, let's get more disturbing. Mummy medicine came in many forms. You could take it as powder, you could mix it with wine, you could turn it into a paste and apply it to wounds. Some even used melted mummy fat as a rub for sore muscles. One recipe recommended stirring dried flesh with honey and herbs to make a sort of ancient energy shot. Doctors claimed it worked because the person had died whole, preserved with ancient power, and charged with spiritual energy. But not just any mummy would do. The best ones were said to be dark, resinous, and ancient. True Egyptian corpses. As demand exploded, grave robbers, smugglers, and corrupt traders joined in. They raided Egyptian tombs, ripped mummies from sacred burials, broke them apart, ground them down, and stuffed them into glass jars to ship across Europe. Egyptian history, pulverized for profit. And this wasn't just commoners. Kings and nobles bought mummy powder by the ounce. Francis I of France kept it in his personal medicine cabinet. English aristocrats mixed it into chocolate drinks. Some popes reportedly used it to cure migraines. The more ancient the body, the more powerful they believed it was. But eventually, the supply of actual Egyptian mummies began to run out. So dealers faked it. They started using recently buried bodies, criminals, slaves, the poor, and dried them artificially to sell as mummies. That's right. People were eating freshly dead humans, thinking they were consuming ancient magic. And no one really noticed the difference, because most people never saw where it came from. By the 1600s, mummy consumption had gone mainstream. Medical texts listed it as a standard remedy. Doctors argued over the best type. Should it be powdered bone or full-body extract? Male or female? Young or old? There were guidelines for storage, texture, and smell. The trade was so lucrative that some tombs were destroyed entirely, their contents ground into dust and sold to people trying to cure stomach cramps. Let's check in again. Would you be more weirded out by taking powdered pharaoh? Or unknowingly swallowing someone who died last week? It's both happened. But eventually a few people started asking questions. By the 1700s, some physicians began to doubt whether corpse powder actually worked. They noticed infections didn't go away, fevers didn't break. Patients sometimes got worse. But many still kept using it because it was familiar, it's had history, and the placebo effect is strong. Even into the early 1800s, mummy medicine lingered. One British surgeon, John Pettigrew, publicly denounced the practice after witnessing mummy grinding firsthand. He was horrified. He called it desecration disguised as medicine, but that didn't stop people from doing it. In fact, while doctors slowly moved away from corpse-based treatments, a new, even stranger mummy trend took hold. Art. Yes, people started using mummies for paint. There was an actual pigment called mummy brown, a deep brown oil paint made by boiling down mummy flesh, mixing it with oils and resins, and selling it to artists. It was used by some of the most respected painters of the 19th century, so even when people stopped eating mummies, they started painting with them. Imagine a masterpiece hanging in a museum today, and realizing part of it was made from an actual human. That happened. Eventually, the mummy trade collapsed. New laws in Egypt restricted tomb raiding. Medical science advanced, and people slowly realized maybe eating corpses wasn't actually helping, but the legacy remains. For hundreds of years, Europe consumed Egypt, literally. Thousands of mummies were lost forever, ground into powder, shipped across oceans, and swallowed by people who thought it might stop a cold. The irony? We now know that many of those ancient mummies were contaminated with bacteria, mold, and heavy metals. Consuming them may have caused more illness than they ever cured. So next time you reach for pain relief, be glad it doesn't come with a label that says made from Pharaoh. And remember, the next bizarre medical trend might seem just as normal, until history looks back and asks, what were they thinking? Let's say you're in 17th century London. You walk into an apothecary. The shelves are filled with jars of powders, oils, and tinctures. You're sick. It's fever, aching joints, maybe even bleeding from the gums. And what does the doctor prescribe? Dose of mummy powder mixed with wine and stirred with crushed pearls. This wasn't fantasy. This was medicine. By the 1600s, consuming powdered mummy flesh had gone from bizarre fringe idea to widespread cure-all. Doctors swore by it, priests blessed it, and nobles paid fortunes for it. Mumia, as they called it, was thought to be more than just medicine. It was strength, ancient power, and spiritual protection, all ground up into one dark, bitter spoonful. And people weren't just swallowing it. They rubbed it on wounds, mixed it into oils for muscle pain, spread it on their skin like a healing paste. Some believed it could stop internal bleeding. Others claimed it treated epilepsy, headaches, ulcers, and even depression. It was the go-to solution for nearly everything, and the older the mummy, the better. Pharmacies in Venice, Paris, and London boasted that their mumia came from real Egyptian tombs, from real pharaohs. The idea was that ancient preservation made the body powerful. The blacker the flesh, the more potent the cure. That was the belief. But the truth was darker. The supply of real mummies couldn't keep up with the demand. So dealers started faking it. They dug up freshly buried criminals, dried their bodies in ovens or the desert sun, rubbed them with tar to make them look ancient, then ground them up and sold them as Egyptian. People were eating recent corpses, sometimes within weeks of burial without knowing. The deception didn't stop there. Some apothecaries skipped human remains altogether. They used animal bones, charcoal, or resin, and passed it off as mumia. But the price stayed high, because the image, the idea of consuming a preserved king, was irresistible. Let's pause for a second. If you found out your medicine was made from someone who died a month ago, would you still take it? And if your life depended on it, would you want it to be human? Comment below. And if this is the strangest thing you've heard all day, feel free to like or subscribe. Only if you want more of this kind of history, of course. Now back to the trade. Doctors created all kinds of recipes with corpse ingredients. One French physician recommended a potion made from dried human heart mixed with wine. Another prescribed a salve of fat scraped from the body of a freshly executed man, heated and applied to broken bones. That wasn't just one quack. That was published medical advice. In Germany, fat taken from criminals was called poor sinner's fat, and it was prized. Hangmen sometimes sold the fat from bodies they had just executed. It was believed to heal everything from arthritis to toothaches. And if that's not disturbing enough, yes, moss. Collected from the bones of the dead, dried and powdered, it was taken to stop nosebleeds and seizures. They called it usnea. So let's review. In the golden age of European medicine, people were eating mummies, rubbing themselves with corpse fat, drinking bone powder, and harvesting tomb moss. And they thought this made perfect sense, because medicine back then wasn't just about biology. It was deeply tied to symbolism. If the body died whole and was preserved, that meant its life force remained inside. Consuming that life force, they believed, gave strength and healing. And who had more life force than a preserved pharaoh? There was even a belief that violent deaths like execution produced the strongest medicine. So fat from the freshly hanged? That was premium stuff. The darker the story, the more powerful the cure. But over time, cracks began to form. Some doctors began to notice that people weren't getting better. Others questioned the ethics. Why were they stealing corpses from tombs? Why were they desecrating graves in the name of health? And why were they so sure it worked? By the 1700s, a few brave physicians began speaking out. British surgeon John Pettigrew exposed the trade in fake mummies. He revealed that most mumia was modern flesh and resin, not ancient Egyptian remains. He published his findings, gave lectures, but the belief didn't disappear overnight. People were still using mummy-based medicines well into the 1800s, and even as medical schools moved away from corpse-based cures. The art world moved in. Enter mummy brown, a rich brown pigment made by boiling down mummy flesh, bones, and resin, and turning it into oil paint. It was popular in the 18th and 19th centuries, used by some of the most respected painters in Europe. It gave a warm, translucent finish, perfect for shadows and skin tones. But again, it was made from real people. Artists sometimes didn't know. When they found out, many were horrified. One famous painter, Edward Burne-Jones, buried his paint tubes after learning what they were made of. But others didn't care. Mummies were still being ground up, this time not for medicine, but for beauty. Let's pause again. If a painting on your wall turned out to be made from human remains, would you keep it? Or would you feel haunted every time you looked at it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Eventually, the trade ended. Egyptian authorities cracked down on tomb raiding. Science evolved. And people began to realize that eating, smearing, and painting with corpses probably wasn't the best way to treat a headache. Modern medicine moved on. But history didn't forget. For over 300 years, the dead were eaten by the living, not in horror films, but in real life. Wrapped in linen, crushed in mortar, swallowed in the name of healing. And the next time someone says they don't make medicine like they used to, be thankful they don't. Because if you lived in 1600s Europe, your prescription might have said 1 teaspoon of powdered mummy 3 times a day with wine.